Welcome back to Aspire to Lead. I'm so grateful that you're here, taking time out of your day to grow as a leader and educator. Before we dive into today's episode, I wanted to share some exciting updates about how you can support the podcast and some incredible tools that can help you in your work. This podcast is made possible thanks to our amazing sponsors like Magic Mind and S'more. These companies provide tools and resources that I truly believe in, and by supporting them, you're also supporting the podcast. To find the latest deals, links, and discount codes for these sponsors, head over to joshsamber.com. It's all there in one place, making it super easy for you to take advantage of all these exclusive offers. In addition, I'm really excited to share a brand new partnership with High Five, an incredible student behavior tool. If you've been following the podcast, you might remember we discussed this amazing resource a few episodes back with my good friend Nathan Maynard. High Five is going to be a game changer for student behavior and classroom management, and I can't wait to bring you more details about this partnership. So make sure you're staying tuned for all of that wonderful information and the savings that will be coming with that. As always, thank you for supporting the podcast, for tuning in, sharing out the episodes, and being a part of this amazing community. So let's jump into the episode as I have two fantastic guests, Tom Hierck and Alex Kajitani. Tom has been an educator since 1983. He served in roles across all levels and even as an instructor at UBC. Known for his inspiring and practical presentations, Tom works with schools and communities across North America to build positive school culture and effective relationships. He is the author or co-author of 25 books and was recently recognized as one of the top 30 educational professionals in the world for 2024. Alex is a 2009 California Teacher of the Year and was a top 4 finalist for National Teacher of the Year. He's the author of several amazing and acclaimed books, including the one we're going to talk about today, You're a Teacher Now, What's Next? And he's best known for being the Rappin' Mathematician. Alex has delivered a TED Talk, been honored at the White House, and even been featured on CBS Evening News. These two are truly amazing leaders in education, and I'm so grateful to have them on the Aspire to Lead podcast. All right, Aspire leaders, thank you so much for joining this week. I have the marvelous and wonderful opportunity to speak with Tom and Alex. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining the Aspire to Lead podcast.
Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, we've heard lots of great things, and I hope we can live up to the level that's been established by prior guests.
Definitely. What an honor. Thanks for having us.
Oh my goodness, gentlemen, you have a phenomenal book here. You're a Teacher Now. I'm holding up for those who are on YouTube, and I'll make sure I have the link both on social media and in the show notes. But I have just been blown away by this resource. And gentlemen, before we start on some of the important topics in this literature, I'd love for you just to share out, the reasoning behind the book and why you felt like this resources needed to be constructed and disseminated out to the country.
Yeah, really, I've had the opportunity, both of us have had the opportunity, especially over the past couple of years, to really work with new teachers in their classrooms, really helping them out, helping to support them. And what was funny is interesting is we would both sort of compare notes and talk about the teachers that we were supporting. And we noticed that the same questions kept on coming up from the new teachers that we were supporting, whether Tom was working at a small, rural school in Canada, or I was working in, at a bigger urban high school here in California. And, questions like, how do I build relationships with my students? Or how do I manage my classroom effectively? How do I even start to set my classroom up? And so, one conversation led to another, especially with all of, so many teachers coming in through, non-traditional ways, not necessarily through credential programs, things like that. And our conversations were, just so interesting that we decided to really put our minds together and create this resource so that, a principal could hand a new teacher this book on day one, say, welcome, start with this.
Yeah, and what we've seen, and Josh, you're probably hearing this from all of your contacts as well, but this emerging phenomenon that I think, and this is year 41 for me as an educator. So, I think I've got a little bit of history with this profession, but we're starting to see at a greater number than ever before, the number of folks coming in that have not got their full teacher certification. So, earlier this week, I was in the state of Arkansas. A couple of schools mentioned that in the state of Arkansas, you get 5 years to get yourself fully certified as a teacher. But right now we're hiring people with degrees in other areas. I said, well, okay, so is that rare? They said about 1 in 4, right? 1 in 4
Yeah, I just want to echo Tom. That is totally what's happening, especially with the teacher shortage and some of the alternative certifications, or trying to get emergency licenses, or trying to fill positions that, yes, they have different background and they're coming in to teach, and they haven't experienced. And so, yeah, I think this resource definitely covers a lot of that. I wanted to touch on one of the more important topics at the beginning, which is classroom management versus behavior management. Alex, you just kind of want to talk through that section? And I love what you wrote in regards to the two topics that sometimes people just combine into one.
Yeah, and it's sort of more of like the perfect Venn diagram, right? You've got behavior management in one circle, classroom management in another, with pretty much every teacher, but especially new teachers, sort of in the middle. And I think that was really one of the things that we really were working with new teachers on was, if you have a student or a group of students who's not, behaving the way that you want, instead of just necessarily dealing with that behavior sort of reactively, let's take a moment and let's go back and let's look at how you set things up, right? Let's look at how you set up the procedures and the routines in your classroom. And so first, just helping new teachers separate, okay, classroom management is how I set things up. Classroom management is the systems that I put in place. It's much more proactive. And then having a plan for behavior management, which is more reactive, and a set of responses is really, really critical. Of course, what we all know, the more you invest in classroom management, the less you have to invest in behavior management. As they say, you either pay now or you pay later. And if you pay later, it's a whole lot more.
That whole notion of how are we building this out? I think if I ask new teachers, what's their biggest concern? Number one always is, gosh, what am I going to do with those kids, right? How am I going to structure the class? And what we tried to lay out is some really very practical steps. But what's been a really neat outcome of all of this, Josh, has been we've had veteran teachers say, wow, this was a good refresher for me. I kind of let some of my stuff slide beginning of the year, and here I am now. It's November and I'm wrestling with stuff I should have addressed in August. Part of what we were trying to do there was to say, look, let's get this right from the earliest moment. To Alex's comment, good teaching takes time. Poor teaching takes even more time. You just don't realize it because you may have got temporary relief, but now you've got to rebuild.
I'll add to that. One of the things that I think that we all know, that I certainly found, is that the teacher that I became in the first couple of years as a teacher set me on the course of the type of teacher that I was going to be for the next 10 years. Yes, I made incremental changes in year 3 and 4 and things like that, but really the foundation and the root system of my teaching happened, and especially with classroom management, happened in those first few years. And so it was really important to Tom and I to really get teachers, solid in the fundamentals of classroom management and kind of the obvious high leverage things that you need to do in order to, become the teacher that you're going to be. Because like I said, change is incremental after the first few years, but it's so critical in those first, 1, 2, 3 years that you solidify the base of the teacher that you are.
Yeah, and I would just say too, like the classroom management piece, like the time that you're going to be putting in there, the building healthy relationship piece is huge in the book and the resource. And I would love for you to just share out some strategies, because I think a lot of us assume that our teachers possess these skills when that's not always the case. And we can't assume that as leaders and as administrators. So what are some tools that our teachers, specifically our young teachers, can do in the classroom to build these healthy relationships?
So one of the things we try to emphasize, Josh, is this whole notion of identifying the assets kids possess, right? I think we have to work on the premise that every kid is passionate about something. Every kid is good about something. Now, the range of somethings has expanded, obviously, in this era of the internet. My 11-year-old grandson came back home the other day and asked for $1,000 because he wanted to start his own YouTube channel. So there is all of this other stuff. One of my favorite activities that's outlined in the book is the DNA activity. Not the DNA I used to teach as a high school biology teacher, but the DNA defined as dreams, needs, and abilities. Now, every kid has dreams. They dream of all kinds of things. We got to make sure our job is not to be the dream crushers. Right. There are all kinds of examples of people who did things that maybe, the early predictors were, right? I often share the example of Spud Webb. Can you imagine Spud Webb 5'4" in high school, telling his coach he wanted to be a pro. Right? Look, our job is not to be the dream crushers. So every kid has dreams. We got to find out what they are. Needs, oftentimes driven by the other house they live in. And so we've got to be cautious that sometimes the needs are the basics, right? The physiological needs. And so I think we're doing a pretty good job in schools of addressing those. Abilities as unique as the kids themselves. So what I have teachers do is figure out every kid's DNA, use that to drive your instructional design and delivery. If I find out Josh loves monster trucks, look, I don't know thing one about monster trucks, but we live in an era of technology and I can go look it up. And man, on the next little quiz, the next little assignment, all of a sudden there's names of 2 monster trucks. That kid is walking on clouds. The more we can find out, the more we can utilize that, the more we start to build connections with kids. So I think it's incumbent on us as educators to find out what every kid's assets are, what they're passionate about, and use that to drive our instructional design and delivery.
I love that activity, that the DNA activity. I personally used it and it works great. But I'll also add, one of the strategies that we talk about for teachers is what we call be interested and be interesting, right? So Tom talks about how critical it is to be interested in our students. It's also very important for us to come across as very interesting people, right? People who are interested in the subjects that we teach and people who find the subjects that we teach interesting. I mean, it took me years to realize that for a lot of our students, we are, as teachers, some of the most fascinating people that they have ever met. Now, it helps if, your students are young, they haven't met quite as many people, but we're in front of them all day long. So, take that story and don't be afraid to tell, appropriate stories only, of course, but take the story from your life, the story of the thing that happened to you over the weekend, the story, of what you encountered while traveling in a foreign land, and bring it into the classroom. And don't forget to make yourself a very interesting person as well. So be interested, be interesting is not only one of the strategies that we talk about in the book, I think it's just a good approach to life.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
Well, you've kind of touched on this already, but I'd love to kind of transition this into the engaging piece of the lesson. Because as we know, if the students are engaged, that's actually going to reduce the behaviors, the negative behaviors that we're seeing in the class. And for those who are maybe starting out, maybe they haven't gone through a educational class before, what are some ways or some tools that they can use to help prepare an engaging lesson for their students?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we need to stop and sort of recognize before we talk about engagement and engaging students is what engagement is, right? Engagement doesn't necessarily mean there are fireworks going off in your classroom at all times. Engagement doesn't necessarily mean every kid is up on their table dancing, right? What I found and what we found really is that you are not engaged until you are emotionally involved. So think about what it means to be engaged to a person or in an activity or watching a movie, right? Until you are actually emotionally involved in that, you're not truly engaged. And so the question then is, how do we get kids engaged in the stuff that we're teaching? And, you don't need to get too crazy on this one, especially as a new teacher, but just really grounding in the fundamentals. How can we access what they already know so that they have a running start into the information? How do we connect it to their world, right? Instead of always trying to take the curriculum and forcing it into the students' lives, what if we start with their lives and see where it fits into the curriculum? And then, of course, one of the things that we often sort of overlook as teachers is that closure and the importance of closure. Because, let's be honest, sometimes we just run out of time, right? We're teaching, the bell rings, I meant to get to the closure. But that's really important that students understand, like, hey, when you walked in here an hour ago, you're walking out a little bit smarter than when you walked in, and really being able to identify how they're a little bit smarter. And so, as they say, I know we're all speakers here, as they say in speaking, tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them, right? And the same is true to some extent in our classrooms. Kids got to walk in knowing what they're going to learn. We got to give them a bunch of different ways to learn it and strategies, but then they need to make sure on the way out that they know what they learned and why they're a little smarter than when they walked in. And that's going to get them emotionally involved and engaged.
Yeah. So, we're not talking about needing to become, entertainers. We're not talking about needing to become TikTok teachers, but we are talking about having a good structure, right? So, is there a plan for the lesson, right? What are you doing to start the class off? Do you greet kids at the door? Do you welcome them? Because in that moment, you're also going to get a sense of how the lesson's going to go, right? And then, is there structure to the lesson? And then, when there is structure to the lesson, do you have some instructional agility, some nimbleness to move off of because you've recognized that everyone's struggling with the concept that you thought was going to be a 2-minute thing that is now bleeding into 10 minutes? Okay, right? So it's all of that ability to, and the challenge obviously for particularly for newer teachers is, you alluded to this earlier, Josh, it's not something that we've ever had driven to us, instructed to us. Our pre-service teaching, our training, you were taught to make 17-part lesson plans that looked brilliant, and you never used those again. I mean, I think I still have mine in the original shrink wrap that they came in, right? So how do we begin to build in some of that? And then, as Alex just alluded to, let's make sure we end with something. Even if you get caught with, there's the bell. Hey, now kids, look, on your way out, here's 2 things I need you to have solidified. We're going to talk about this tomorrow.
Yeah, I love it so much, guys. So this is all coming from You're a Teacher Now, What's Next? Wonderful book, resource. Make sure you're grabbing it. And then I want to touch on something that's kind of in the back end of the book. But you talk about mental health, which is so key. I think, when I'm doing keynotes, I think that's like the number one topic that educators want, is just about how to take care of myself, healthy habits. But I know, like, when I first started teaching, that wasn't even in my brain. I was just trying to survive. I was trying to do everything, say yes to everything. And I was just burnt out right away because I was trying to take on too much. And I just would love for you just to kind of walk through some of the strategies that you have in the book in regards to mental health.
Yeah, we talk a whole lot about this notion of self-care, and I think the 3 of us would agree, and I think generally educators would agree, we're terrible at it. As a profession, we're terrible at it. Go back to what you just said. As a first-year teacher, you know what I wanted more than anything else? Was to be a second-year teacher. And so that meant I said yes to everything. I had 5 different preps. I coached 3 teams. I didn't have a classroom. I had a cart that 3 out of the 4 wheels worked. And I thought I was blessed because I had heard stories of people who only had 2-wheeled carts, right? So I consider myself quite fortunate. My daughter is a teacher, and she does a heck of a lot better job of balancing that other aspect of her life, being a mom to 2 rambunctious boys, and right. And she knows when to say no. And I think we've got to get that point across. Self-care is not selfish. It's healthcare. Now, what are we doing to take care of ourselves? If there was a positive that came out of the pandemic, that people did a bit of a better job of that. Now we've got to make sure we maintain that going forward. I'm also happy that we're at a point in our existence where we can talk about our own mental health and wellness out in the open, not in quiet conversations about people, but directly to people, and offer that support. Right? So, who is your support network? Who can you lean on? When we talk about being a team, that means we're there through thick and thin. Right? So we talk about, what are you doing right now? What we try to avoid in the book is that telling you gotta self-care. If that's a stressor, we're missing the mark. We're panicking you into self-care. But what can we do to begin the process of self-care? That reflection. Because in the absence of that, we're worried. The data sets in our profession right now not trending in the right direction. Knowing that consistently 50% of our teachers leave in the first 5 years, knowing that recently 4 out of 10 job postings are not getting filled, 1 out of 10 principals is leaving the profession at the end of this year. Those are all dangerous signs. So we've got to start doing a better job of taking care of not only ourselves, but each other.
Yeah, and I'll add, it's funny, I was working with a group of new teachers, and they told me that their director was really into self-care and thought it was really important. So she had assigned all of the new teachers to do a 2-hour online module on the importance of self-care, right? And so, self-care is nice, self-care is important, but self-care should never be one more thing that teachers have to do, right? And so along with everything that Tom talks about, it was important for us in the book to also make the connection that we also want to evolve from self-care to caring for each other, right? And really creating in our classrooms, in our schools, this culture of really looking out for, taking care of each other. Tom mentioned the people that surround you and your network and things like that. And so helping, especially new teachers, identify from the beginning, okay, if I'm having trouble with classroom management, this person can help me. If I'm having trouble with the behavior in my classroom, this person can help me, And so being able to identify, hey, we have different colleagues for different reasons, just like we all have different friends for different reasons. And so who can I go to, who do I go to when a chair breaks? Because you can spend half an hour going to the wrong people, right? And so once you sort of figure that out and have a, have a direction for your colleagues, now we're really looking out for and caring for each other as opposed to just ourselves.
I want to touch on that word evolving, because you guys do a beautiful job in the book of also talking through like determining long-term career plans. And I know for myself, when I was a first-year teacher, it was just survival mode. Just don't drown, stay afloat. And I remember specifically my third year, and I wrote this in my book, Aspire to Lead, was like, I got a tap on the shoulder in my third year about becoming an administrator. And I laughed at them because I was like, I'm just learning how to do the job. And you're talking about something that I'm thinking like a decade later, I would start thinking about, I'm not prepared for this, but you do a great job of kind of laying that out for folks. So for, our young educators, our young teachers, what should they do to help them determine where to go long-term?
Well, the first thing that I would say, and this is sort of a reverse answer, but for the teachers who are really struggling out there, new teachers who are struggling, maybe you thought, I always wanted to be a teacher, and now you're in your first or second year, and you're thinking, well, maybe not, right? What was I thinking, right? What I've seen a lot of times is teachers who are excellent teachers, but maybe they're teaching the wrong level or they're teaching the wrong assignment, right? Teacher goes in, thinks they want to be a high school teacher. They don't like the job. They're not happy in the job, but really they were supposed to have been a fourth grade teacher, right? Similarly, a fourth grade teacher is just about to quit, but gets placed in middle school and goes, oh, I actually love it here, right? So before if you're really struggling and you're thinking maybe this isn't the job, just to take a moment and go, okay, wait a minute, maybe this is the job, but I'm just not in the right place, or I'm not in the right school, things like that. I've worked in schools that were very collaborative and everybody supported each other and talked. I've worked in schools where everybody just went into their room and did their own thing. And so it's really about finding the right place and knowing that there are all different types of schools and leaders and colleagues out there. And so that's the first thing that I bring it up, because I just don't want new teachers to miss that opportunity to see that sometimes it's just being in the wrong place, not necessarily in the wrong profession. Tom, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the other part is, and this is, I think, part of the challenge and also the joy of this profession is I don't know that you can ever say you got it all figured out. Right? Like, as I said, this is year 41 for me. And I got to tell you, I'm still learning. I can sit in my daughter's class and learn. She's doing things I never would have thought to do. So, this is not a profession to become a settler in, right? We've got to be committed to that growth. And what I've found over time is there's always colleagues who are willing to. Now, they might not be the most exuberant or the most boisterous, but if you ask the questions, they're going to be there to support you, right? So what are you doing to continue to grow, right? And look, we're great at that in this profession. Let's go back to January of 2020. How often did you use the word pandemic? How often did you Zoom, right? Unless you were trying to feed your kid yucky vegetables and pretending you were an airplane. But look how quickly we responded, right? I think sometimes we have to remind ourselves in this profession that we can do hard stuff. And when the hard stuff is driven by the right reasons, right, that rallies us to, then I think that's the point, right? So do we have other people we can lean on? Do we have other colleagues we get fascinated by? I wanted to be the world's best biology and chemistry teacher. Got to do it for 1 year. At the end of that year, they said, job's up. I said, but you said I could stay. They said, yes, but we never said in which job. How'd you like to be the severe behavior teacher? Now, zero training in special ed, zero training in behavior. But if you ask me where my career got defined, it was in year 2, where I was asked to work with the neediest learners, and I found my jam. Everything I've done since then, I can trace back to being a better educator, to Alex's point, than I ever thought I could have been. I was going to coast, and be this great biology chemistry teacher. And all of a sudden I had to go back to square one, work with kids who people had given up on, convince them that they could learn and start to build out. Let's take advantage of those opportunities and view them as such.
I was just going to add, I think that's one thing, to sort of expand on Tom's point that we, on more of a macro level that we can do as a school system is as teachers grow, as teachers gain more experience, as they evolve, their professional development needs change, right? And so we talk about differentiating for students all the time. And yet then we, as a system, we're often putting all the teachers into one training and things like that. So I think that hopefully some of the next steps in education on a bigger level is allowing teachers to see, okay, how do they learn best? Is it online? Is it one-on-one coaching? Is it small groups? Is it going to the big conferences? But then allowing them some flexibility and some choice and some control over, okay, what I really need is I need some more reading strategies, or what I really need is I need to learn some specific ways on how to teach adding fractions, but really helping teachers to evolve in the areas that they need to grow, as opposed to, all right, everyone's sitting in the gym for this one reading training kind of thing.
Yeah, excellent point. So, gentlemen, I know we're talking about teacher development and making sure that we're providing them with the tools needed to be successful early on in their career. I just want to switch over to our young leaders and administrators. So, if there's something they can do tomorrow or next week to enhance their leadership journey, what would you recommend?
That's that $1 million question. Yeah. I think, again, part of that is to understand your strengths. I think that's really important for anyone who moves into leadership. Right? Go back to when you were asked, Josh, early on. Like, take a moment, step back and say, wow, I wonder why I was. And then identify your growth areas. Right? Language is important. I don't talk the language of weakness, because I've discovered over time that weakness ends up being a defense mechanism. It's a weakness of mine. It's a good thing Josh or Alex is good at that. Growth area requires me to grow. Right? So now, if I'm being asked to shift into, what do I know? What do I know about my strengths, and what am I prepared to commit to fill in some of those gaps? Who else on our team? Right? We've got to get to the point where we don't just need nodding heads. We don't just need a series of mini me's in our leadership cadre. We need people who are going to challenge and question. And so what are your strengths, and what are the opportunities you have to grow?
Well, and I'll give one specific that I think that, emerging and aspiring and all leaders can really put some effort into getting good at, and that is running a meeting, right? I have come to believe that your leadership abilities and skills are on full display during the staff meeting, whether it is a department meeting, whether it's a one-on-one meeting with a parent, right? Just as the culture of any family is exposed at the dinner table and what the family talks about and how they act around and treat each other, the culture of any school or department is exposed during the staff meeting. And when that staff meeting is run by an effective, confident, poised leader, everything changes. And so if it ever came down to one skill, as unsexy as it might be, a leader's ability to run a meeting, an effective, efficient meeting where everyone stays on task and leaves feeling good, not that it was an hour wasted, that is one skill that I think all leaders should and could develop.
That's awesome. All right. So, gentlemen, I know our listeners are going to want to reach out to you if they have any questions or just connect with you on social media. So what's the best way to do that?
On most platforms, just first name, last name for me. On X, it's just at first initial last name. Website, tomhierck.com. I think it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyways, that Alex and I love when colleagues reach out and share things, right? That's what helps us to craft the books, etc. When we hear about the experiences, we have our own, but it's always good to hear from others and how they've added some value to some of the things.
Yeah, and I'm at Alex Kajitani at ALEXKAJITANI, or you can also get a hold of me at through alexkajitani.com and reach out anytime, pick up the phone. Like Tom said, we love to hear, to talk, and we want to make sure that this is the beginning of the conversation, not the end of it.
Wonderful. So for those who are watching on YouTube, thank you so much. I've been throwing up the websites of both these gentlemen, so make sure that you're jumping on there. I know there's a ton of resources available to you. Of course, I'll have all the social media, websites, and whatnot linked in the show notes and in the YouTube description for y'all. For those who are watching, you've been seeing me throw up the book. It's a phenomenal resource, highly recommended. Make sure that you're reaching out and grabbing that as soon as possible for, like Alex said earlier, Doesn't matter if you're a new teacher or a veteran teacher, this is important information. It might be a wonderful reminder for you, regardless of where you are in your journey. With that, gentlemen, thank you so much for not only being on the podcast, but for all the support that you provide to educators. I know you've been doing it for a very long time, and I just appreciate your wisdom and insight today.
Really appreciate it, and look forward to hearing from everybody else. Enjoy the rest of your day.